Hi, attendees. Welcome to the National Council on Electricity Policy National Association Coordination Call for January 2021. I apologize for the slight delay in start. We have been hearing some reports of outages and internet connectivity issues. So I'm going to turn off my webcam, but I did want to just give a moment to say hello and let you know that there is somebody behind the voice that you're hearing. Dominic, we can move to the next slide. So thank you all for joining today, and we are going to record this webinar so that we are able to post it to our YouTube channel. And then if you have any questions during the presentation, please use the questions box that I just alerted your attention to with my welcome message, and that's the way that you can communicate with us if you're experiencing any issues or anything like that. We are trying to get you the call-in number, or we do recommend that you switch your audio to a phone if you are experiencing issues. Otherwise, we also recommend logging out, logging back in. That can take some time though, so we understand if that's a last resort. The presentations and recording will be posted on the electricitypolicy.org website, and any unanswered questions that are submitted will be passed on to my fellow and group coordinators. Please join our listserv so that you can receive updates, and we are ready to from NACA. We'll get to all of them. They'll all have about 5 to 7 minutes of presentation. So moving on to NCEP updates. If this is your first time joining NCEP, we wanted to just give an overview slide that NCEP is a peer learning platform to examine the ways that new technologies, policies, regulations, and markets impact state resources and the bulk power system. We are currently exploring the evolving interface between the transmission and distribution system as the resource mix on the grid changes, and we're looking at that through the lens of planning, operations, and markets. And you'll hear me repeat those themes a few times if you stick around the NCEP community. And I also wanted to mention that NCEP is a project of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, and is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy. And we bring together these groups you see on the right. When we get there, the NCEP Executive Committee would like to announce that they are welcoming 2 new Executive Committee members, Honorable Sarah Freeman of the Indiana Utility Commission and Jeremy Tarr, Office of the North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. So we welcome them and really appreciate their state's participation in NCEP and their perspectives that they're bringing to the Executive Committee, which is essentially the steering committee for NCEP. So we can move on to our updates quickly. Recently, we held our 2020 annual meeting on evolving compensation and market mechanisms. The presentations are available and the recording is coming soon. A preview webinar on introduction to markets does accompany that meeting, and the recording and presentation from that are available on the website right now. In about a month, on February 25th, we will host a special session featuring the panels from the previous annual meeting on optimization through benefit cost analysis. We're bringing back moderator Tanya McCloskey, Commissioner Abigail Anthony, Julie Michaels, and Snoop Price to provide their remarks on optimization through benefit cost analysis. So have your questions ready. And today we will, we're kicking off our September 21 annual meeting on coordinated planning. That's our working title at least. And we are looking for topical webinars on transmission, distribution planning, operations, and markets throughout the next several months. If we can move on to the next slide, this is the announcement of our scope and a call for abstracts for our next meeting. So we are looking for our community to let us know what you're interested in hearing about for 2021 transmission and distribution systems interface, the evolving connections there, and what we do about planning. There have been a lot of movements recently, and our meeting on markets is well timed with FERC Order 2222. So what else can we be doing with planning and aligning planning for members and to our stakeholders? We are looking to our experts to let us know of your latest research. So please fill out the form if you have any idea or any abstract or research that you would like to show during our meeting. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you. We can move to the next slide. Just touching on our available resources, we have a transmission distribution resource catalog with our updates ongoing. We will be adding resources that came out of our 2020 meeting soon. And then a few months ago, we released the State Energy Officials and PUC mini guide, so I wanted to make sure that you knew about that. Another one on the way for this year. So that's it for NCEP. I'm going to introduce my director and Supervisor Danielle Suspernet from NARUC to provide the updates from the Center for Partnerships and Innovation at NARUC. Danielle, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks, Carrie. Dominic, you can go to the next slide. And one more, please. Great. Nice to talk to you all. Happy to see so many folks who were able to get on, even though we know that there's some kind of an outage in the DC area. As most of you know, I'm sure NARUC is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and our members are the utility commissioners and commission staff across the country who regulate electricity, natural gas, communications, and water. Next slide, please. The Center for Partnerships and Innovation is the technical assistance team for NARUC's members, and we tackle issues and provide support around energy infrastructure modernization, electricity system transition, critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, resilience, and platforms for discussion of emerging issues. So I'm going to provide to you an update on some of the most recent resources that we have released over the past 2 months. Next slide, Dominic. And then also some upcoming events and resources you can watch out for. So some resources that are available online right now. There are a number of webinar recordings from activities we are conducting in the fall through December. We have a monthly webinar series that we invite you all to participate in and join. That happens one Thursday each month, often the second or third Thursday of the month. And you can register for those well in advance. We've posted upcoming webinars through, I think, next June or July. In the fall timeframe, we had webinars about bulk energy storage, offshore wind, and corporate renewables purchases, all of which were well attended and excellent. You can find those presentations and recordings on the website. We also operate an electric vehicle state working group, which held 2 webinars in the last quarter of the year around performance-based regulation related to transportation electrification, and also a really interesting webinar around commission and state legislature relationships, very apropos to NCEP. We've also been doing quite a bit of work around microgrids, and you can find a recording about advancing community resilience through microgrids on our website. And I'll also mention 2 brand new papers that we wrote and released with NASEO. And finally, there was a 6-part webinar series this fall around carbon capture, utilization, and storage that really went from sort of 101 levels all the way up to 404 levels. And that included a wide range of perspectives and audiences, speakers. The last 3 sessions of that were in October around regulatory considerations, international development efforts, and domestic efforts, really talking about what's the state of deployment for CCUS across the country. Next slide, Dominic. We also released a number of papers that might be of interest to this group on smart grid. It's listed twice, but there's one around understanding cybersecurity for smart grid, and specifically questions that commissions might ask utilities. But of course, those are relevant to other interested parties, also state energy officials, et cetera. And a series of smart grid learning modules that are relevant for anyone in the state audience, electricity policymaker audience. Those are short videos, lectures that were given live that are recorded with presentations that really walk through some great examples and understandable language around what smart grid interoperability is, why it's important, what are some of the benefits. We have some new resources on cybersecurity, tabletop exercise guides, a series of recordings that are posted on distribution systems and distribution system planning on our website. And as I mentioned, those 2 new papers around microgrids. One that's on user objectives and design approaches. So what are some of the goals that different users are considering when they're considering working towards development of a microgrid project? And then another on funding and financing that I expect NASEO will mention in more detail. And just yesterday, we released a new publication around stakeholder engagement, a decision-making framework. Of course, because it's coming from NARUC, it's directed towards public utility commissions, but the framework is broadly relevant, would be appropriate and support energy office, governor's office, et cetera, style of stakeholder engagement. So I hope that you all will look that up and find that valuable. It's a highly readable document, very stepwise. Next slide, Dominic. Last couple things, we are working actively with NASEO on some cybersecurity publications and National Governors Association. One around partnerships and information sharing, and we also have one that I don't think is listed here around solar and cybersecurity. We will shortly be releasing a guide to cybersecurity workforce and opportunities for recruiting and retaining cyber workers in state government, again, written for commissions, but broadly relevant for state government. And we'll be offering a training for NARUC members in late February. The NARUC NASEO Task Force on Comprehensive Electricity Planning, which has been focused on alignment opportunities between distribution, resource, and transmission planning, will be releasing all of its materials. This is the culmination of a 2-year effort, and that'll be in about 2 weeks on February 11th. Everyone is welcome to join us for an interactive virtual workshop that will be held that afternoon from 2 to 5 Eastern. So we would look forward to seeing you there if you want to learn more about those resources, materials, and how they can be used by other state decision makers. And Carrie already mentioned the NCEP additional session. So I think that might be the end of my presentation. Dominic, one last slide. Great, thank you very much. I look forward to any questions in the chat box.
Fantastic. And can you just confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back on the line with you all. I'm joining by my phone, just having some connectivity issues. So unfortunately, I can't use my video at the moment, but it's still good to be on the line with you, and hopefully I'll be able to see you all in person soon enough. Moving to the next slide. One after that. So my name is Dan Loff. I'm the Energy Program Director at the National Governors Association. I think most of you know who we are, but if you don't, we are the nonpartisan membership organization of the nation's 55 state and territorial governors. Next slide. Wanted to just start here on elections, because I know elections are still top of mind, but focusing on state elections in particular, because in addition to federal elections, we did just have a number of gubernatorial elections across the country. So this map, which I know is a little small and hard to read, but will be shared with all of you, shows all of the gubernatorial elections that took place over the last 3 years. Dark purple is for those governors newly elected in 2018 or 2019, and then the light purple is from the most recent election in 2020. I think there are about 12 or 13 governors who are up for re-election. And going to the next slide, of note, we had 4 new governors elected. So I think all of the incumbent governors who are eligible for re-election were re-elected. So our 4 new governors are Governor Jim Forte in Montana, Governor Cox in Utah, Governor Maga in American Samoa, and Governor Pierluisi in Puerto Rico. So bring that up to say that despite a lot of the change that we're seeing at the federal level, and that change may propagate down to the state level, of course, for energy policy, we did not have a lot of leadership turnover at the gubernatorial level. So with the exception of those 4 states and territories, we're anticipating a number of the objectives that governors have had will continue. So hopefully this is helpful, and I'm happy to answer questions on this later on in the webinar separately. So if we can advance 2 slides. One more. So just want to start off here by talking about some of our recent resources that I think are going to be relevant to this group. First, knowing that COVID-19 continues to be a major focus for state governments, I'm sharing a number of resources here that we've been developing and releasing at NGA. The links here, I think, are all directly relevant to you all in the energy policy space, but for those of you in state government, I do encourage you to go to our website, nga.org/coronavirus. We have a whole slew of dozens of policy memos and trackers on gubernatorial executive actions on state policy and state actions related to combating the coronavirus, economic shutdowns and recovery and the like. A particular note, and I know this is top of mind across the country, we've been tracking vaccine rollout and state, in particular state vaccine rollout and resources very closely. So that link in the bottom left will bring you to those resources. And it includes a state-by-state summary of state and local vaccine approaches, or approaches to COVID-19 vaccine distribution. So I do hope that is valuable. If you have questions on any of those, again, they're not all coming from my team, but I can always connect you with the right person at NGA who is working on the topic. So next slide. A couple of recent papers to share with you all just from the last half of 2020. First is on the topic of clean energy planning, governor's energy policy goals, and implementation of those goals. So this paper is building off of the 40 or so state and territorial renewable and clean energy goals that are out there, some through RPS, some through other mechanisms. It does a deep dive into how those goals are structured across states, and then explores some of the implementation mechanisms actually move from a goal to actual action. So that is, okay, you'll see a link for all of these papers in the bottom right, and encourage you all to download them and take a look. Next paper is kind of the other side of that clean energy coin. So going to the next slide, it's a document called The Road Ahead, Planning for Electric Vehicles by Managing Grid Interactions. This is a follow-up to a workshop that we hosted on electric vehicle grid integration last fall. And the paper provides a deep dive on integrating electric vehicles into energy systems, focusing particularly on deploying charging infrastructure, managed charging, and vehicle to grid technologies and vehicle grid integration. Next slide. While not directly energy oriented, I know that broadband is very much top of mind as we are all in various states of, facing various states of stay-at-home orders or business shutdowns. And I know many of us are calling into this webinar from our homes. And through our work with states, are working to more fully connect our communities and infrastructure systems. So we've started in for communities, leveraging the infrastructure networks that they have. So we'll be following this up by actually establishing a new Governor's Broadband Learning Network in the coming month or so, and we'll continue to provide some deep support on the topic. The last new resource that I'll mention for everybody, going to the next slide, is one that I know I've discussed with this group in the past as something that is forthcoming. So I'm very pleased to share that it is no longer forthcoming. It is now available to the public. It's on our website. It's our State Resilience Assessment and Planning tool. This is a self-assessment that we intend to be led by governor's offices, but completed in collaboration and with input from agencies and state officials across state government. It does have a critical infrastructure focus with a particular focus on energy resilience, and has 5 modules that include that explore establishing effective resilience governance, evaluating and mitigating risk, assessing vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure and specifically critical energy infrastructure, mitigating economic consequences and financing resilience, and then strengthening community ties. So our intent is not to take any of the results from this tool and make them public, but rather to provide some assistance to state teams as they complete the tools and identify areas for improvement. But it is intended to be the results of the assessment are intended to be for the benefit of the state taking that assessment. So please do feel free to go ahead and download the tool and take a look. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or any of my colleagues listed on that website. So just a few more slides here, and then I'll open it up to questions. So I want to just touch quickly on our 2021 areas of focus. So I'll have a few listed here and then one more slide to follow. But a couple of projects that we have coming up that you all may want to participate in or just track. One is on utility affordability during the COVID-19 pandemic, recognizing the utility disconnection moratoriums that were implemented by governors, regulators, and legislatures across the nation early on in the pandemic. And now that those are expiring, I think there may be a dozen that continue to be active. We're getting a lot of questions from our members about how they can continue to address affordability concerns and bill arrearage concerns, both for customers and utilities. So we are, based on a roundtable discussion that we held with a number of state and industry experts, we are in the process of drafting a white paper with some policy and regulatory solutions. We're also diving deep, or continuing to dive deep into energy cybersecurity preparedness in partnership with NASEO and NARUC on a lot of this. That includes working directly with NERC to prepare for Grid X6 and carve out a more deliberate role for states in that exercise. We're also gearing up to release new white papers on state cybersecurity, energy cybersecurity governance, and another on information sharing for energy cybersecurity that we're developing in partnership with NASEO and NARUC. For infrastructure resilience, I mentioned implementation of the SRAP tool. We're also planning a new workshop and white paper on state resilience planning and funding. And then the next slide is my last one. For clean energy deployment, we are planning a training series and a series of roundtables on the roles that energy markets will play in new technology and clean energy deployment at the state level, a line of work on nuclear energy, and then for energy efficiency and
leadership on that. I think we have a question. I'm going to see if somebody wants to be unmuted. So Ms. Trisha Gannon of Delaware, I believe, has a question. Ms. Gannon, did you have a question? You're self-muted. Okay. We'll circle back to that. And if you do have any questions, the best way to reach us is through the questions box. But if you do put up your hand, we will see if we can call on you. I do see the comment about the presentation slides. We have uploaded them as part of the GoTo dashboard, and it should be a handout. 2101 NCEP NCORD is the PDF, and I will work on seeing if there's a permissions issue in the meantime. So thank you for that comment. But if there's any other questions, we're here for that. So moving on, I think. Thank you so much, Dan. Again, I will move to NCSL, I believe. Glenn Anderson is with NCSL. He is co-program directors with Chrissy Hartman, who was not able to join us today, but Glenn is here to provide updates on behalf of NCSL. Glenn, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Thanks. Yep.
Okay, excellent. And Christy is on the call. She may chime in if I miss anything, but thank you. Yeah, so I guess as Dan reminded me, but you know, thanks everybody. I really appreciate the information that we're receiving to help us keep up on what everyone's doing, because there's so much going on. And as Dan talked about the election, that kind of reminded me, we also did cover the election quite heavily. And just kind of recap, I think folks might be interested in just a quick update on what happened in the states if you're not fully aware. But with this last election, we found the lowest number of chamber flips since 1944. So the status quo, which is highly unusual, really was maintained. And with just 2 chambers flipping in New Hampshire. And what was remarkable now, there's quite a partisan divide in the fact that 30 states, both houses are Republican, and in 18 states they're Democrat, and there's only 1 state where they're split. And I believe that's the first time since 1914 that only 1 state has been split between the parties, between the House, between the 2 chambers. So that's also remarkable. We did have a very high turnout. I believe it was the highest since the 1800s, from what I'd heard, with regards to percentage of folks voting, which is great. Approximately, the turnover was approximately 20% of legislators turned over, and 27 new top leaders. So we will be working, you know, quite seriously to try to bring those new legislators up to speed on energy issues. So that's one of our big tasks, is really helping those policymakers understand the energy system, especially those folks that are brand new and don't have a lot of background. I would also mention that the coronavirus has really impacted legislative sessions during 2020 and will definitely impact them during 2021. As you know, there was a lot of focus with regards to addressing challenges with budgets and employment and school closings and just closings of the economy and such, that many policymakers didn't have as much ability to focus on kind of new and innovative energy policy, although that does not mean that not a lot was passed. There was still quite a bit of activity. I would say in a number of areas, however, it was a bit lower than we have seen in the past. So with that said, we do have a number of recent resources that I wanted to highlight. I think what we were really excited about was getting our two new hybrid and electric vehicle publications up, one on plug-in on special fees. Obviously, there's a big discussion around the challenge of funding highway infrastructure, and with increasing fuel economies, they're looking to new revenues. So there's a lot of discussion around hybrid electric vehicle fees. Also, state policies promoting hybrid and electric vehicles. There's a lot of activity there, and I think a lot of really interesting fairly large report that took quite a while to produce. That was the result of a foundation, NCSL Foundation partnership. It's called Creating Smart Communities, a guide for state policymakers, looking at the role that the state legislature has in promoting or potentially also obstructing smart communities. So public-private partnerships. The big focus really was, well, smart communities is really a massive discussion. We narrowed it down to some extent by focusing on the confluence of transportation, electricity, technologies, and electricity, energy delivery, and communications to keep it manageable. But that was we're very happy with that report as well. We also produced a fairly large, pretty sizable report as well on this weatherization with clean energy programs, looking at various state programs for promoting energy efficiency and weatherization as well, and how those can work in harmony and also and support federal programs. We also did an interview. We've been working quite heavily with Public Utilities Fortnightly, and did an interview for an article that was published there, and that link is also available. We released a couple issues of both our News Reactor, our newsletter, and our Plugged In. Well, News Reactor is our nuclear power and nuclear waste newsletter, as well as 2 issues of our monthly more general energy newsletter featuring legislative trends and federal updates. Next slide, please. So in addition, we, as everyone realizes, we've all been confronted with having to remotely reach our audiences and train them. So we have heavily relied on remote meetings and webinars. So to that end, we've had a number of different virtual meetings and webinars. We had one on building the 21st century workforce. This is definitely a growing issue among policymakers, as particularly as there's new technologies arriving and a large portion of the energy workforce aging and expected to retire. So, and they're also looking for economic development purposes as well, how they can tap into the energy industry and help grow their economies. We also, our Energy Supply Task Force, which normally meets in person, we've been transitioning that to meet remotely. So we met in October, and we had a session as well. So we had a discussion around we're currently producing a document, basically a primer on energy storage. And so we discussed that, and then we also had a session around resilience, planning for resilience on the distribution grid, and looking at how a more distributed system can addressing some of the challenges it may present, and also obviously taking advantages of the benefits that it can provide when it comes to planning for resilience. With our Legislative and Energy Horizon Institute, which is a 60-hour training, that's WEHI for short is the acronym, but the 60-hour training we have every year, and we usually bring around 35 state legislators through it. It's really aimed and focused at bringing policymakers up to increasing basically their energy IQ, training them on generation, distribution, and the policy side as well when it comes to electricity, and not just electricity, but energy delivery in general. So that has been a really useful training that we've had ongoing for many years. However, we were unable to really hold that person, so we basically held a virtual launch session and postponed the 2020 to the 2021 year. So we will be holding that this year. We also had a webinar series for alumni of that training. We also had on December 2nd another Energy Supply Task Force meeting and discussed risks of grid infrastructure investment, so kind of de-risking and planning around grid infrastructure investments. That was a popular topic among our task force. So next slide, please. So upcoming publications and events. So as I mentioned, we have an effort right now ongoing on energy storage. So we're preparing a primer on storage and state policy options, and we're working with PNNL on the primer itself. So we're collaborating with them on producing that. And at this point, we have a draft, which we are just kind of finalizing our first revisions on, and we'll be circulating that with both PNNL and DOE, and then hope to, get that released within a month or so. Could be longer. Sometimes review at DOE can be extended, but that would be approximate date. We also are working on an energy storage database, and you see on the right that's an image of a screenshot of the database. So it's an interactive database that explores and summarizes energy storage legislation and activities, and we've broken it down by 4 different kind of main energy storage topics. But the interface is great, and it really indicates which states there's been activity in, depending on what your ranges and selections are in your search, and also allows you to look at legislation and also view the text of the legislation. So it's I think it's going to be a great resource, and we're excited to be working on that. We hope to get that up maybe within a month or so. That should be online. We're also planning on working on energy markets, web brief, in the next few months. We have a big legislative trends. We do this each year, and basically summarize all of the main activities in the energy sector, energy area that state legislatures have been active on. And so we'll be kind of looking at all those major areas, including COVID, transportation, energy storage, and grid modernization, as well as clean energy and energy efficiency and affordability. So look for that. We hope to get that up in the next few weeks, and I think that will be a really interesting document. It always gets a lot of traction each year. Also planning COVID response video and web page, and advanced nuclear reactors report. And we have some meetings kind of off into the future, in person, hopefully, Legislative Energy Horizon Institute this year in July, and also planning likely virtual energy supply task force in May and June. So next slide, I believe that's it. And so feel free for to reach out to us specifically, or if you have any questions, we are happy to take them right now. I'm not sure if Christy's on and had anything to add.
Thanks, Glenn. No, nothing to add.
Thanks, Glenn. We did have a question. How does someone subscribe to notices for NCSL's upcoming events?
Well, we do have our, we are happy to put you on our mailing list for our newsletter, and the newsletter generally highlights the any major upcoming events that we are planning, webinars and the like. If they're, obviously invitationals and Lehigh and such, those are not, we don't broadly publicize those, but everything else, definitely we do highlight it in the newsletter and also on our webpage, which is also linked to here.
Great, thanks. Not seeing any other questions for Glenn, but thank you for the questions that have come in. We will turn over to the National Association of State Energy Officials. We have two folks with us today, Sam Kramer and Campbell Delahoyd. Sam, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So just a quick about us. So first of all, thanks for having us on here. Campbell and I are excited and happy to fill in for Kirsten Verklas, our colleague who is usually on these calls but couldn't make it this time. Just a quick refresher on who we are and what we do. NASEO is the only nonprofit organization for the 56 governor-designated energy offices and officials from every state, each state and territory. So we represent 50 states, 5 territories, and the District of Columbia. We've been around since the early 80s, and if you can talk about it at state level energy policy, we have probably had our hands in it at some point somewhere. We work on a number of different initiatives to help our members kind of understand better the nuances of state level energy policy, and to also share best practices across the nation in order to help states better reach their energy goals. So a lot of the times the energy offices and the governor's officials end up being the same person. So we do end up thinking through the lens, a little bit of lens at NGA as well. So I actually used to work at NGA, so it's kind of nice to be able to think in both lenses. But basically, we're also a huge repository of information on issues of particular concern to the states and what the states want to talk about. We have several different committees in which we explore different areas of energy. We've got our electricity committee, energy security, buildings, financing, transportation, and government affairs as well. And then finally, we also do serve as the voice of the energy offices in DC. And make sure to advocate for some of the things that the energy offices are very concerned about. We can go on to the next slide, please. So for this update, we've got a couple of things we want to talk about. I'm going to primarily talk about the NARUC NASEO Microgrid Working Group, since that's where most of my focus has been. And then Campbell will talk about some of the cybersecurity initiatives we've been working on with NARUC. The big announcement we have this time is that, like Danielle mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we do have 2 papers that we have just released as part of the Microgrids Working Group. We have the Microgrids Working Group with use cases and for different microgrids, and also the funding and financing paper. We do have a few other projects up here with the slide, and I think if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about the Microgrid Working Group. So we can go to the next slide. Great. So like I said, we've got 2 white papers out, the user objectives and design approach for microgrids. This paper talks about the customer motivations for developing microgrids and how microgrids can adapt to meet different customer needs and desires. Microgrids, by their very nature, are a pretty flexible grid application. And so there are a lot of different ways in which they can help support customer goals and wants and desires, or government goals, wants, and desires, depending on how they're constructed. When customers think about designing microgrids, they think about, how to designate critical loads and energy efficiency investment options, how to connect multiple facilities or multiple meters as part of a, more of a community microgrid, what kinds of generation or storage resources they want to use in terms of how clean they want the microgrid to be, some of the cost drivers involved in putting together a microgrid. There are a lot of different things that go into making a microgrid, and so we really wanted to explore the different use cases and how microgrids can be configured to that. So for this paper, we actually worked with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and did some modeling runs of their distributed energy resources customer adoption model. I think I got that right, or DERCAM. And the DERCAM model basically helps identify the optimal configuration for a microgrid based on the location and operational choices that a customer may want to use. So the paper goes into and models a number of different microgrid configurations that that would be optimized for hypothetical customer situations. So if a customer wants to prioritize resiliency or wants to prioritize the use of renewable energy resources or energy storage, we talk about that in this paper and where we want to go to. And so that really talks about, thinking through the first couple of steps of the microgrid process, where how do you get the design right and how do you get, to make sure that you're best, anticipating your customers' needs, and then what energy offices and public utility commissions can do to kind of lay the groundwork to make this an easy process. The second paper talks about different funding and financing options to help promote the development of microgrids throughout the states. Obviously, there are a lot of different cost drivers to microgrids, and microgrids can require substantial amounts of capital. So when you've got these different microgrids, you need to find ways to support them. So this paper kind of talks through the different options that are available with private capital, state sources of capital, and federal, potential federal sources of funds that customers, microgrid developers, and local governments, you name it, can leverage in order to help procure the capital to either fully fund or finance microgrid development through each stage of the process. One of the things we note is that earlier on in the process, right now, it makes more sense for folks to kind of rely. Folks are going to kind of rely more on state grants and other sources of funding in order to get through the design stage and the initial design stages, simply because it's harder to source private capital if you haven't determined what revenue streams the microgrid is going to be producing. It makes it a little bit harder of a value proposition. So although you want to have capital providers in from the early stages, you're still going to need the initial source of capital to get you through those early stages. So we talk about the different options that are available at the state and federal level, and then the private sector, and provide examples of microgrids that have used each source of capital in order to fund their construction. We also had a webinar that focused on talking about community resilience through microgrids. We hosted that last month. We had a couple speakers on to talk about California's EPIC program, which has funded a number of microgrids throughout the state. We talked about that program generally and the goals of that program and how it's promoting resiliency, especially with their public system power shutoffs. And then we went into a little bit more detail into one of those microgrids in Blue Lake Rancheria and some of the goals of that microgrid and how it's kind of worked so far. And then finally, we also explored a little bit more of the value of resilience from solar. We had a speaker come in to talk about their methodology for how they kind of calculate the value of solar in a microgrid context. We will be having an upcoming webinar as part of the working group to discuss key insights and takeaways from both white papers. We're looking to schedule that February 2021, but we're finalizing the details at this point. As of right now, that's what we've got for the updates for the working group. I'd like to pass it over to Campbell to talk about the cybersecurity initiatives that we have going on with NARUC.
Thank you, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, realizing we're slightly behind schedule, I'll just provide a quick high-level overview of any of these and put a standing offer out there for any of the attendees to reach out to either me or Kirsten regarding these projects to ask questions or see how you can get involved as appropriate. So first, an ever-growing topic, cybersecurity, a few things that we're currently involved in. As Danielle alluded to earlier, we have a joint project with NARUC called the Cybersecurity Advisory Team for State Solar, or CATS. CATS is a pretty cool project. We're looking at different ways that state energy officials and public utility commissions and their staff can support cybersecurity measures in behind-the-meter solar projects that are being developed within their respective states. So this is a 3-year project that we're engaged in, but we're looking at ways to incorporate a lot of external partners and make sure this work is following proper trajectories as it becomes more prominent and important, at least within our members' respective portfolios. Another area that we're working on is cyber threat briefings. And so far, a lot of the threat briefings in the energy sector are geared more towards utilities and federal government, and of course there's good reason for that, but we're looking at ways in specific areas that state energy offices, especially those that are directly within their respective governors' cabinets, can get involved and be aware of some of these threats and vulnerabilities as appropriate, again, just to see what they're able to do and what they should be doing and who they should be coordinating with. Last, in this subtopic at least, as was mentioned earlier, we're supporting NARUC and working with NGA on a cybersecurity information sharing paper. A lot of, I'd say the broad goal of this project is to formalize some of the, at least up until now, informal procedures and mechanisms behind cybersecurity information sharing as it pertains to states. Really exciting project and hoping to unveil some new information and not reinvent the wheel on what's definitely a complicated area. Another interesting project I wanted to cover is our Western Petroleum Shortage Response Collaborative. This is a collaborative that currently has 13 different Western states participating, and we're looking at ways that those states can coordinate during regional and potentially catastrophic petroleum shortages or emergencies, and align their internal efforts and procedures, programs and measures with those of their neighbors that have shared petroleum infrastructure and transportation aspects. An ongoing effort that has taken a new I guess, format is our energy response playbooks for states and territories. This usually feeds into our more generic energy assurance planning and our members' maintenance of their state's energy assurance plans, which are essentially the emergency management plans for the energy sector within each state. But one new angle that we're taking with this is supporting a more actionable playbook style document so that those states that do have those responsibilities can go into any emergency and have checklists, very clear-cut actions, authorities, limitations, and other special information that might be helpful in responding to any emergency or any energy emergency, that is. Next, an ongoing number of projects that we're looking at are different resilience financing mechanisms. First and foremost, we're looking at ways that our members can support or develop their own FEMA BRIC projects. For those of you that are not familiar, the FEMA BRIC program is the Building Resilient Infrastructures in Communities program, and it replaced FEMA's pre-disaster hazard mitigation program from many years past. But essentially, this allows for a lot of funding to be dedicated to resilience projects ahead of disasters. So states will apply for this funding on a competitive basis for the most part, and look to invest some funds up front. And we're supporting our members as they develop and advise on more energy-related resilience projects. Similarly, we're exploring ways that HUD community development block grants can be used for energy resilience. And we're also looking at ways that state energy officials can partner with their DoD counterparts on domestic defense critical infrastructure issues. And I'll pause there, and we can get rolling with anything unless there are any immediate questions.
Thank you both. Appreciate those updates. I'm not seeing any questions for them, but please do send them through the questions box if you do have them, and we can get to them at the end if we need to. In the meantime, I will move on to our colleagues at the National Association for State Utility Consumer Advocates. David Springy, their executive director, is here with us today. David, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Well, first I want to thank the team and the board at NCEP for hosting these periodic get-togethers. I mean, it's good to hear from our friends in the N group circles and get an update on what they are doing. For those of you that are not aware, NASEO, National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, we are the statutory advocates at the state level that are consumer representatives in the PUC process. There's also a number of our members that are citizens utility boards or other recognized utility advocates like National Consumer Law Center or AARP. So we're actively involved on the consumer side of the regulatory process. Just a quick update on sort of what we're focusing on, and I'll be brief. In the fall, we did a 4-part webinar series with support from the Department of Energy and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory as part of our Planning Electricity Systems and Distribution Resources series. We looked at the impact of DERs on net load, demand flexibility as a resource, planning for energy storage, and then planning for EVs and managed charging. Obviously, these are all things that are going to impact at the distribution, the retail level, at every state. So we're very focused on making sure that we understand and are updated on the technology and the impacts and the possibilities of these resources. So we appreciate DOE and LBL support for that. We did have our November annual meeting. It was our first meeting that we had to do virtually, which was a wild adventure. Came off great. It was the biggest meeting that we had and had some really great topics. If y'all missed it, you missed me live cooking paella for our social event along with the wine school. It was probably a one-off that will never be repeated, but it was a great time. One thing I do want to sort of hit from that, and I don't know if anybody saw it in the end, we did a spotlight. We lined up about 20 of our NASEO members in the different states and turned them loose with Steve Mitnick from Public Utilities Fortnightly, and did sort of a, consumer advocate spotlight. So it's out there on the web. PUF is promoting it, and it's kind of an interesting sort of look at the different, some of the different consumer advocates and sort of the range of issues and concerns that are out there. So that's kind of fun. We are looking now forward to our June mid-year meeting. In theory, we're in Indianapolis, June 13th. But we'll see how that goes. We're having discussions right now about whether it's just a little too early and whether we'll be virtual again. Obviously, for virtual, look for emails. We'll love to have you back again. And then obviously we're starting to look a little more forward to the November meeting, we are always with NARUC at the November NARUC meeting. NASEO is always there. We co-locate. So with luck, we're all hoping to be back on in-person meetings at that point. So we haven't, we're pretty small. We don't really have the horsepower to produce studies and do the types of things that some of the N groups do. But we've been pretty focused on, most of our members have been pretty focused on COVID-19, affordability, moratoriums, utility accounting orders, some of these sort of nuts and bolts on the ground things. We have on our website stood up a set of COVID pages. So there's a COVID page for every state. To the extent that my members have kept it updated or send us information, we try and keep it updated. So that, the COVID and the implications of COVID are sort of sucking the air out of all rooms at this point for our membership. But we're also very focused on Congress and what it's doing. We've been focused on the stimulus package. Obviously, there was $25 billion in the stimulus package for rent and utility relief. We are a little concerned that there's been very much focused on rental, leaving far less for homeowners, and there's obviously plenty of struggling homeowners out there. But we were also heartened to see that Congress finally recognized that water, there's really low income support for water, and so they actually put some money into that. And so we're hoping to work with Congress to do a new stimulus package and again keep the focus on making sure that affordability is maintained for utility services, and obviously we want the utilities to maintain great service, and you got to have money to do that. So that's kind of a big focus of ours. And then I don't know if anybody else saw it, but Congress also required FERC to stand up its Office of Public Participation. There's Congress FERC has to report, but that's kind of a big move. It's finally a recognition at the national level that a good portion of at least the electric side of the bill comes through RTOs and markets in terms of transmission, and there's a lot of cybersecurity and NERC issues and things that happen at a federal level, and there's really a lack of consumer focus there. And so the Office of Public Participation, while undefined, I think is at least a positive step on Congress's part, and we look forward to working with Chair Glick and the rest of the FERC commissioners around that. Again, as I mentioned, we don't do papers and research projects really on our own. We're very small, at least at the national level. But I will say that to all of my N group colleagues, thank you so much for all the work that you do. I take everything that you send, including this presentation with all these wonderful links, and that stuff all goes straight out to our NASEO membership. So even if we can't produce it ourselves, we are very reliant and very appreciative of the information that all of our other N group colleagues provide. And certainly, we hope that as you're looking at projects and looking at these things, that you will reach out and include the consumer advocates sort of within your work. So please make sure that you're sending us updates and emails, and I will be sure to push those right out. So with that, I will close. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thanks, David. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate having you as a partner. So thanks for being here today. I'm going to turn quickly to Miles Keogh. Miles, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Carrie?
We can.
Nice. Friends, it is such a delight to be with all of y'all today, and a particular pleasure to see my friends Sarah Freeman and Jeremy Tarr added to this august grouping. It's always nice when you know people, and it's even better when you really like them. So I hope the two of you guys enjoy working with the National Council. I've been working with the National Council for coming up on a couple decades now, and it's great and worth it. Unlike everybody else, except for maybe Nasuka, well, maybe like Nasuka, NACA doesn't do a ton of technical assistance, and the work that we do on technical assistance is usually convening our agencies to provide technical assistance to other policymakers as they're developing policies, and usually that's EPA. So unlike what everyone else talked about today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what NACA put together as a transition document to the Biden-Harris administration before it was coming through. And maybe some of those points will either be an affirmation of the work that the technical assistance providers on this call are working on, and maybe it'll also hopefully be just a tiny bit of maybe, if I'm lucky, it's a crystal ball into some of the things that we'll all be thinking about next going forward. NACA is a family of 155 agencies, including state and local air pollution and climate agencies that are the agencies that implement the Clean Air Act. We did a transition letter to the Biden-Harris administration pretty early on. We did another one that was the re-election scenario and one that wasn't. And the transition scenario we ended up delivering on included 7 recommendations. And of those 7 recommendations, on day 1 of the new administration, executive orders were issued that, not comprehensively, but certainly made progress on being responsive to 5 of those. So we think that that those had some impact. And so I'll talk through just a little bit of those because I think some of the other ones may be interesting too. The 7 are for the administration to center environmental justice, to respect state and local authorities as a pillar of the Clean Air Act, to ensure scientific and technical integrity, to advance new programs to protect public health and the environment and address climate change, to reset permitting and enforcement priorities to emphasize public health and equity, to improve technical assistance to state and local agencies, and to address the urgent need for significant increases in federal funding. Those sound pretty high level. They are pretty high level. We have a lot of specifics in each. For example, in centering equity, one of the things that, which is our first recommendation, one of the things that we've been paying attention to for about 18 months now, but that really picked up steam with the centering of attention on racial justice issues starting late spring, early summer, was we started looking at the data on how programs that deliver air pollution improvements actually deliver those on a demographic basis. And across the country, we had agencies showing up identifying that the air pollution outcomes, the public health outcomes, were inequitable. And weren't just inequitable where they significantly had worse outcomes for ambient air pollution for poor people. They actually had even more statistically significant worse outcomes for Black people, people of color, and indigenous people. And so with that in hand, you know, we've done a lot of work to try and construct programs that enable a shift in the thinking about how we deliver clean air and climate mitigation that moves us from thinking about it as a regional problem where we've done great work to improve air pollution and public health on a regional basis for the average American, and start thinking about it more and more in terms of the extremely localized and specific outcomes that happen for local communities. And with what looks like a shift towards much greater emphasis on climate, that's going to go beyond just criteria pollutants and air toxics and also get into climate justice issues. We asked EPA to develop an equity, diversity, inclusion strategy and plan with specific and concrete steps to move that paradigm to the center of the air pollution question. And we're really looking forward to working with Secretary Regan from North Carolina. We think the folks in North Carolina have done some really interesting things with environmental justice. We've got a handful of agencies that are pretty sophisticated as well. And so we think that that's going to be something that we'll see a lot more, and that will bubble out to the things that your associations and agencies are likely to see. We also expect, our second request or recommendation was for the administration to respect the central role that state and local agencies play in the administration of the Clean Air Act. And that goes for climate too, and as much as the Clean Air Act is an instrument that's used to advance climate priorities, it's not a quirk that state and local agencies have this big role in the Clean Air Act. It's a pillar of it. It was built that way because we had state and local clean air agencies before we had an EPA. Certainly the last few years, we've seen almost all the advancements on climate action done at the state and local level. So again, we've seen some receptive signs from that from the new administration and from Congress. And so how that may apply to y'all is that they may be receptive to a greater state and local role in the design and implementation of programs to advance in that direction. Our third request was to restore scientific and technical integrity, particularly to core EPA actions, things like the science transparency rule and the cost-benefit analysis rule that were put into place, some of the other rules that were put into place that didn't have the best and latest science used in them, or categorically excluded some of the best and latest science in government decision-making. That was of great concern to the NACA membership, and so we've seen some good signs of receptivity for moving that back into the center. In as much as y'all are experts with technical and policy and scientific expertise, I hope this is a crystal ball reading for y'all, that that expertise will play a larger role and have a greater opportunity to play in policy development and implementation. Carrie, I know I'm feeling your eyes staring through the computer. I'll go quick on the next few ones too. We also asked to advance new programs that improve public health and that address climate change. We've asked for strong, comprehensive, inclusive, economically sound climate change mitigation and adaptation policies and regulations, which we go into at length, and that state and local agencies should be worked closely with as EPA addresses its obligations under its endangerment finding to address greenhouse gas emissions. We also have fairly strident recommendations around electrification of vehicles and moving away from combustion in the transportation space. The procurement announcement by the Biden administration of 674,000 electric vehicles to be bought to flip the federal fleet to EVs, I think shows a real potent opportunity there. And that, of course, has relevant consequences for those of y'all in the electricity space. On permitting and enforcement, we had a bunch of recommendations, but broadly, they're to move the administration away from a philosophy of regulatory streamlining that creates a lot of off-ramps, that makes rules about when you're serving the public good apply less often, and instead apply a regulatory streamlining philosophy that says it should still apply, but it should be easier to do, easier for the regulated communities, easier for the regulating communities, more straightforward, that if you're going to reform complex systems, that doesn't just mean use the same systems, but much less often. That doesn't preserve the public interest and advance public health. And then, sorry, I'm almost done here, Carrie. On technical assistance, a lot of the things that we asked for involve greater technical assistance to state and local air agencies on things like ambient air monitoring and the like, but also greater technical assistance on understanding things that are sort of at the periphery of implementing the Clean Air Act, that are much closer to the center of the work that y'all do. And in addition, in understanding things like modeling and sensors and the integration of satellite data, artificial intelligence, data analytics into the work that we do at a greater level, so that we can understand the effectiveness and improve on the effectiveness of clean air programs and climate change mitigation programs. And then finally, we've asked for more money, and I'm sure y'all are asking for more money too. Like a lot of your agencies out there in the world, you know, the federal support for the kind of work that we've done has been pretty flat. It's probably been even flatter for our agencies, or declining for our agencies more than for many. We haven't seen more money in the clean air programs since 2004. And there's certainly been a lot of new stuff since then that have been responsibilities that we've integrated since 2004. So I have a pretty constant presence up there on Capitol Hill, asking questions about how we can do more for our state and local agencies with the amount that we have and how we can make that amount stretch. And I'm sure you're there too. We expect to see quite a lot of development on that front in the stimulus packages and in other appropriations directions. With that though, let me back off and just say, I think that what we're about to see, this time 2 weeks ago, a lot of the things that seem pretty inevitable, or not inevitable, that seem quite possible, seemed quite impossible 2 weeks ago. I think the pace of change on this stuff is going to come real quick. I think some of the equity issues are extremely large. I think the focus on climate change is going to drive extremely fast action. I'm hopeful that the NACA member agencies can continue to work with the folks on this call, this community, to help make all those fast changing things as good and as beneficial to the public interest and public health as possible. And with that, I don't expect there's any questions, but thanks for your time.
Thanks, Miles. We really appreciated that overview of your transition letter. Dominic, we have that one slide from NRI that we can show really quickly. We had intended to include our sister organization, the National Regulatory Research Institute. They are a research arm of the NARUC, and we wanted to just give you a few links. I've included this in the presentations that are linked. I've updated the package there, but they have some new resources on FERC and thinking about low-income customers. They're launching a introduction to utility accounting today. If you wanted to join us there at 2 o'clock, and then they have a second series in February. Otherwise, they also have policy trackers on net neutrality, PERPA, and COVID-19. So I wanted to make sure you all knew about that. With that, I am not seeing any questions, and thank you all for hanging out with us for an extra 5 minutes. We will be back with you in about 6 months for the mid-year review, but until then, we hope you can join our programs and our partners' events and make use of our resources. Please let us know if there's anything we can do, and we will make sure the message gets passed on to them as well. Thanks for your time today. Catch you next time. Bye.